Best talk is always people are willing to do something else, but you came here. Thank you very much. You also noticed that the presentation that I had originally sent to this conference is another one concerning probability and possibility measures and how we represent them and their interrelation in oppositional structures. But that talk was very mathematical in nature. And those conferences have very different audiences. Sometimes those audiences are very mathematically oriented. Sometimes they are very philosophically oriented. And this one definitely is more to the philosophical side. So I decided, well, that's better replaced and the talk is something more amenable to you guys. And I hope I can accomplish that. That's a talk. That's something that I'm beginning to prepare. So it's not finished work, really not. And I discuss some ideas with you, and maybe you can give me some ideas to how to progress in my work. What?
You need to help?
Left and right.
Left and right.
Over there.
Sure.
On the right.
Yeah,
Ah,
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. There are. I had the wrong version of the presentation, but doesn't matter. Yeah? Just check something. That is this work that I'm doing is a complement to previous articles published from this conference. Both have to do with Jung's simile of the spectrum. Jung's simile of the spectrum is I'm going to explain what it is on the course of the conference, but they have to do with a possible dynamic for the epistemological process that take place in the development of science, in the evolution of science. And the questions raised in those two previous papers had to do a lot with language and how language itself evolves. And I received several questions concerning this aspect: what's a language, and what can be considered a language, and what language has to do with consciousness and causality and causal explanations, how are causal explanations expressed in language, and what all that means. So this work is trying to address some of those questions. This line of work developed inside a context of Jungian epistemology. Carl Jung is very known as a psychologist, but different from other lines of psychology, Jung's work always had a very strong epistemological interest. Jung is not only interested in the practice of psychology, Jung is also interested in the epistemological aspects of psychology. Not all psychology schools are like that. Freudian psychology, even Lacanian psychology, they don't really care about epistemology. They have a theory of how to practice psychology. But their work is not really, epistemology is not at the core of their interest. Jung is different in this aspect. Huh? And I'm orbiting some of Jung's ideas for quite some time. In 2014 and 2015, I published two papers about the development of the ontology of chemistry in modern science. And of course, modern science starts with the work of Lavoisier in the 18th century. And before that, people did chemistry, but did chemistry with a completely different theory. And that theory is called alchemy. And the ontology of alchemy is completely different from the ontology of chemistry. And how the hell did we move, did we change from the ontology of alchemy to the ontology of modern chemistry? It's far from simple question. It requires a symbolization process, making symbols for new things, and integrating those symbols in an ontology. And well, that's, by the way, alchemy was one of Jung's major areas of interest. And he was the guy that revived the interest in alchemy. Before Jung's work, nobody was interested in alchemy. Alchemy is dead. Alchemy was dead and done. Nobody cared about it. And Jung revived the interest in alchemy. Alchemy books and used books shops were the cheapest books in the store, and now they are the most expensive books in the store. So that's due to Jungian psychology. And after Jungian psychology revived the interest in alchemy from a psychological point of view, real chemists or historians, people working with history of chemistry, this begin to think, well, maybe we should pay attention to alchemy too, to see as a symbolization process, not in the area of psychology, of course, but in the area of chemistry. That's where alchemy was born. And today you look like a specialized journal like ISIS, you will see dozens of papers published in history of chemistry, in medieval history of chemistry, that's history of alchemy, including experimental alchemy, tentatives to rebuild a laboratory how it was in the 12th century, 14th century, the 15th century, and to figure out what the practices were, where the means and methods were, and what in all those strange nomenclature of alchemy correspond to. That's all part of this movie. So that's one area where my interest in Jungian psychology comes from. Another area that attracted my interest in Jungian psychology is that Jung is the guy in psychology that makes use of colors. He pays a lot of attention to colors, to the psychology of colors. Jaives, in his talk, showed a picture of Jaspers, right? That he who is one of the guys that used to come to these conferences. He was a specialist in color theory, and he was one of the first people to point out how color theory can be expressed very nicely using oppositional structures. And Jung used colors to color code. Jaives did a color coding, red, blue, and green, for basic modes of opposition, right? Jung did the same thing to basic modes of ways of understanding. And well, that was another path for me to Jungian psychology. And in the history of analyzing the development of scientific theories, we are often faced with that's what I was talking about, color theory. We are often faced with a science that has to take care of multiple aspects. Here you have a spider chart that's part over that's called a spider chart or what's the other name, a radar chart, where you have gymnasts in a competition and they are scored on different aspects, and there you have the grades that the gymnasts got for different maneuvers that they make. That's one way of seeing several different aspects, but it's not really an oppositional structure, right? With colors, you can represent the oppositional aspects between the oppositional character of those aspects in a much nicer way. And say if you have grades for a green requisite, a red requisite, and a blue requisite, and the gymnast is lacking one of them, say is lacking in blue, then it will show up to you as a yellow tone. That is a very distinctive thing. It's a thing in itself. The lack of blue is yellow. It's a positive thing. That's very nice about it. There is only obvious limitation that with colors you can only represent 3 different aspects. For humans, bees are smarter than humans. Bees have 4 color receptors. Some shrimps have 5, 6, or 7. They're kind of limited. We only have 3. But that's okay, because 3 is the kind of the minimum that we need. If you have the opposition with only 2 aspects, the opposition have no resolution. There are several ways to express that. My favorite way to express that is that the algebra of rotations. A rotation in R1 is a discrete thing. A rotation in R1 in the real life are reflections, right? Reflections are discrete operations. If you have a rotation in R2, that's a complex number multiplying by a unit complex number. That's a continuous operation. Then you can maneuver. Then you can take a patient to gradually see what's going on. The word gradually is the key word. So you can introduce dynamics to those things.
You need that.
I need that? Para que todos oigan. 3 is the minimum, but it's also close to the maximum. Psychologists know that the human mind cannot retain attention in too many different aspects. You can build an algebraic lattice with dimension 100 if you want, but no human will retain its attention in 100 different aspects. Here you have Venn diagrams for 2, 3, 4, 5 sets. With 5 sets, it's already difficult to see what's going on. And psychologists, experimental psychologists and theoretical psychologists realize that, well, the human mind have a limited capacity to pay attention to different things at once. Jung himself said 4 is the maximum. He even gave a funny explanation, because equations of degree 4 are solvable by radicals. Equations of degree 5 are not. I don't know where he came with this explanation. But in modern experimental psychology, they try to measure this, how many different aspects a typical human can pay attention to, and the answers range from 4, that was Jung's guess, to 5 or 6, or maximum of 9. So 3 is the minimum, but it's already good enough for me to do a lot of things. And I will show you how we implement those ideas using the basic concepts of Jungian psychology. To discuss language and how we represent things in language, and how we represent things in language have to do with ontology. The word ontology is widely used with two different meanings. If you go to a computer science department and ask them what's an ontology, they'll tell you, well, an ontology is a well-defined language with a well-defined lexicon and a well-defined grammar. And of course, when you build an ontology, they even have tools to build ontology. Oh, this kind of stuff to build ontologies. And if you build a good ontology, the words in your ontology have to correspond to things in the practice of your scientific discipline, and the grammar, the syntactic and semantic rules have to correspond to whatever is going on in your laboratory, and that's a good ontology. And we have lots of tools to help you build an ontology. And in some areas like genetics, genomics, for example, it would be inconceivable to do what you have to do without those tools to build ontology. Ontologies become too big to be handled, to be managed by hand, right? And then you go to the philosophy department and ask them what's ontology, and they take a deep breath and say something like, ontology is the study of what there is, and say it in Greek, right? In Attic Greek, and you say, okay. And what's the relation of this with the ontology that the computer science people are talking? And they say, absolutely nothing to do with it. And you ask the people from the computer science department, is that true? Yeah, of course. We want nothing to do with those guys in the philosophy department. But I'm going to convince you, try to convince you, no, they should be the same thing. If they're not the same thing, that's something wrong, something deeply wrong, either with with the ontology that you are building for your discipline, or with your conception of ontology. And I will try to convince you that even bees have themselves good ontologies for their language. And another question that once you talk about ontologies, talk about creatures that have a language and with a good ontology, you start asking questions like, do the bees actually mean what they are saying? And my answer to this is yes. Bees actually mean what they are saying. Do they express a conscious intent? And my answer to that, yeah, sure. They have conscious intent. It's not the same as our conscious intent. It's a different way of conscious intent. But they basically their conscious intent is a collective conscious intent. Now again say how I'm coming close to Jungian psychology. It's a collective. For us humans, we can have individual consciousness, individual express individual intents. These cannot. But sometimes they make more sense than we humans. So, in order to do all that, I'll come back to this, but I'm going to, in order to convince you of all those crazy things that I'm saying, I will try to show to you that the language of the bees the language of the bees, the language that the bees use, is an archetypal symbolic language. Those three words are important. Archetypal symbolic language. So let's discuss a little bit what those words mean. First, the word symbolon. Huh? Symbolon, both in Jungian and in Aristotelian philosophy, the word symbolon in Greek means that you want to, you tell your cousin in Sparta that a friend of yours is going to visit him, and he's carrying a symbolon to prove that he's actually your cousin, your nephew, your cousin in Sparta has already half a dollar bill. Well, for them it wouldn't be a dollar bill, it would be a Greek drachma.
Drachma.
That was broken in half, and the visitor brings the other half of the drachma, and if they fit together, you know that's enough, right? They two pieces of the same thing that fit together. So the two pieces are different. One is the left part of the dollar bill, the other is the right part of the dollar bill. There is no way you can confuse one with the other. They are different things, but at the same time they fit together exactly, precisely. Huh? And in this way, they are symbolic or metaphoric. They clearly show how those things, the two parts are the same part of one thing, keeping their own identity, continue to be different parts, different things. I was immediately in love with the logo of the University of Puerto Rico, Luce Masticio. We have the sun, the raising sun, and a volcano, and that looks like a margarita. Margarita is looking for the sun. I too want to be part of that. It's a very beautiful, poetic metaphor. Do they can be somehow part of the same thing? Can that identity be reached? Well, that's what a university is for, right? Beautiful, beautiful. Less poetic, but more coming close to science. Theory of continental drift. For a long time, people have realized that continents fit together. The shape of the continents fit together almost perfectly, right? There was this guy, Snyder Pellegrini, in 1868 that realized that, and people said, nah, crazy. It's just a coincidence. It's not a true symbol. And then Alfred Wegener, in the beginning of the 20th century, realized, well, that fitting is too good to be a coincidence. And people said, nah, it couldn't be. You are crazy. And only much later, people began to realize that continents actually drift, and well, actually that symbolon is really a symbol. And that's a characteristic of good science. That's essential characteristic of science, that sharpness, that exactitude, that precision. That's what, ultimately, that's a thing that I'm working on several years. That precision has to do with what's essential about scientific theories, right? Bees speak with great precision. When a bee finds a good snack field over here, she wants to tell to her sisters, all bees in a hive are women. Men are just only exist for a small amount of time with a very limited purpose, and then they are discarded. A beehive is a vicious woman dictatorship. Huh? So a bee finds a healthy snack food over here. She wants to tell the other bees where to go, angle relative to something. It's relative to the position of the sun, and how far they have to go. So they go back to the hive. The hive is dark. They cannot, inside the hive, they cannot see the sun. So what they do, they replace the horizontal direction to the sun with the vertical direction. Even if it's dark, you will know where is up, right? So they translate this angle to an angle to the vertical. It's a metaphoric statement, right? Yeah? And that translation is metaphorical. And then how they communicate how far they have to go, they do a waggle dance. How do you say waggle dance in Spanish? In Portuguese, it's rebolado. They shakes his butt. How do you say that in Spanish? No?
Yes.
Vicky, Vicky.
Vicky Vicky? No. Well, I don't know. No? And how fast they rebolo, how fast they waggle, has to do with the distance. And for how long they waggle. If you count the number of waggles, you can determine how distant. So they know where to go. So the waggle dance run is proportional or is equal to the distance to the source of the food, so that 1 second of waggling corresponds to approximately 1 kilometer. Approximately very sharp precision. Huh? The angle up corresponds to the angle to the angle to the vertical with very sharp precision. Even if we don't see where the sun is, we have a very limited vision. Bees also have polarized filters, so they can find out where the sun is, even if you have clouds in the so and finally the sun moves, right? The sun doesn't have a fixed position in the sky, but these are very good astronomers, and they constantly adjust the orientation angle as to the elapsed time since the dance to the flying time to go to the right direction. To do that, they have to know vector geometry. Right? In high school, where do you teach vector geometry? In 4th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, maybe in the university.
Yeah, we depends.
In the university,
yeah.
Dumb humans. Bees are born knowing vector geometry. The moment they are born, they know. We know all that. Of course, vector geometry is the grammar of this language. And what's an archetype? An archetype is a pattern of behavior that is inborn, inherited, genetically inherited. So the lexicon of the bee and the representation of those archetypes in language are called archetypal, in language or in something else, are called archetypal images or archetypal representations. So the ability of the bees to communicate and do all those things is archetypical, and they can represent them in language. So this is how you see that the bee language is an archetypal symbolic language. Language because it's used for communication. Half an hour. Better get going. And let me skip that. Many times linguists require from what they call language that language expresses conscious intents. And well, at the very first slide, at the very first slide, I showed you a few pictures. Jung, Kant, Darwin, and those two are Carl von Frisch and Carl Lorenz. The last two, Carl von Frisch is the guy that decoded the language of the bees. He was the one who realized, oh, bees can speak, and I can translate what they are saying. It's the guy that cracked the code, the Champollion of bee language is this guy there, Carl von Frisch. And Lorenz is an ethologist that work was very related to von Frisch, and they shared the Nobel Prize for their work in ethology, having to do with many of the ideas that I'm discussing here. So, what people in the linguistics department or the language department, if you ask them what's a language, they kind of don't like the idea that non-humans have language. It's something that is degrading to the language department. No. Bees don't actually have a language. Why not? Well, the one thing they could agree that was a good disqualification, a good cancellation argument is, well, they are not expressing conscious intents, right? They don't know what you're saying. They may even speak, but they don't know what they're saying. Right? And well, it was a long debate. The debate taking place in the science of ethology is what motivated me to study this field, because in the discussions you can see how several of those ideas being discussed fall into in the oppositional structures that can be nicely represented using our beloved algebraic structures of opposition, right? So one opposition is that, well, bees don't actually mean what they are saying. Yeah? And von Frisch, first, those next statements say that in the 50s, von Frisch realized how to crack the code of bee language, and much later on, he had to face this idea that that's not really a language, but bees, because bees don't mean what they are saying. And he finally said, no, bees actually mean. Yeah? He wrote some things like that. The speed in which a message is grasped by an intended group made me think that one might almost speak of a class consciousness or for the collecting assemblage. Who is talking about collective consciousness? That's how we can understand the statement that the language that we use actually express meaning, actually express conscious intents. It's just not individual conscious intent, it's collective intent, it's a collective form of consciousness that again brings me very close to some concepts of Jungian psychology. Huh? And finally, from there we can say, well, that argument that the guys in the linguistics department give is not a good argument to disqualify the B language as a language, but we have to realize that humans do with language some things that bees do not. And there's another form of consciousness that's explanatory consciousness. Causal, the humans give causal explanations. Humans do metaphysics. It's a human thing. Humans do metaphysics. Because humans have a narrative consciousness that is structured around causal explanations. And Konrad Lorenz, the other guy that shared with von Frisch the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for those in this area of study, you can say, yes, that is true, and that drive, esta pulsión, is a streak that humans have to find causal explanations, is itself an archetype. Do you doubt it? Talk to a 5-year-old child. It's annoying what he's doing all the time, asking you, why? His brain is a sponge. He wants to understand why. What's a valid answer to the child question? Why? The valid answer to a why question is an idea, an explanation. That's metaphysics. Aristotle's gnoseological definition of metaphysics. That's a metaphysics. Metaphysics is not something high in the sky. It's there in the child asking why. Okay? So that's the motivation. That's the motivation for those things that I'm trying to do. Oh. How much time? I lost it. 38 minutes. Well, now I have to go. Now I have to go really fast.
Too fast.
Too fast. Okay. I told you Jung had a tripolar structure for consciousness, or three orienting functions of consciousness, which he color-coded. According to Jung, those three orienting functions of consciousness are self-assertion, that he colored red, color of the blood, color of the will, color of emotion. A reality principle that he called green. The learning principle that he said eventually can modify other instincts. And finally, sex drive that he called blue. And sex can be closely associated with language. Right? The earliest form of sex is not sexual,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
The earliest form of sex is horizontal gene transfer, the sex that bacteria do.
Mhm.
They exchange tiny fragments of DNA, of RNA, and they're talking to each other. They're exchanging information. That's language. Language of the bacteria
Hmm.
is DNA coded, right? And so there is a close association between sex and language. That's why I used both. For both of them, the color blue. It is represented in mythology too, in Greek mythology, right?
Hmm.
Sex, the god of sex is Eros, right?
Mhm.
But there are two Eros, right?
Mhm.
There is Eros the young,
Mhm.
that's the flirting god, and there is the older Eros, right? Phanes. So yes. Or maybe not. Huh? So I adapted the
Mm.
color coding given by Young or used by Young
Mm.
to analyze the dynamics of those epistemological movements that happen in the evolution of sciences. I described a few examples of his analysis in a paper that I presented in this conference in Crete that was published in the Studies of Universal Logic book, and another one in the Leuven conference that was just published in Logica Universalis. And using those basic color codings, I can analyze with great easiness for explaining how those oppositions drive the process of evolution of concepts, drive the process of evolution of an ontology, and the means and methods and the theories of the science they describe in several fields of study. We have very close associations with colors, the primary colors, red, green, and blue, and then we have secondary colors, magenta, between the red and blue. Between the instincts and their representation in language are those colors, purple, magenta, and violet, that lie in the so-called non-spectral or paradoxical arc. And Jung said, well, those colors are really paradoxical, and they represent things that are real paradoxical. Because we have instincts that we are not aware of and represent them in language without actually knowing where they come from. And those appear in constructs of our language, or they appear in our grammar, or they appear in images that appear in our dream, and we don't know where they come from, but they somehow correspond to reality. What's that? Very early in Jung's work, in a series of lectures called the Zofingia lectures, Jung asked, well, maybe those things correspond to what Kant called synthetic a priori. And he spent the rest of his life figuring out exactly how that is. And the colors yellow and cyan that are halfway between blue and green, and halfway between green and cyan between blue and green, and yellow between red and green, also represent first mixtures of these colors, but also mixtures of those two colors that are lacking in the third color. Something that has a lot of red and green but lacks blue appears to us as being yellow, right? So we can use that to focus our attention. This attention focus is represented by this subset of vertices and subset of edges that is called a kite. Someone during the conference showed several kites. Who was it? Well, you remember? You? No. Someone showed some. Maybe Alex. I don't know. Huh? A kite is a structure that was developed, that was studied and developed by Jaspers from Leuven, and he used that concept of a kite in a hexagon, in the hexagon in particular, or in other oppositional structures, in more general cases, to focus the attention in one specific aspect of opposition. For example, in this example here, I'm focusing my attention in the fact that these talk to their sisters exactly where the food is relative to the sun, and that information is very precise, very green, and the result is very good. It's very silent. And then von Frisch tried to measure the position relative to the sun, and some days he could do it because there were no clouds in the sky, and sometimes poor von Frisch couldn't do it, but the bees could do it. And he asked, well, how can that be? How can the bees know where to go if I cannot see it? If I cannot see the sun, well, you cannot, but the bees can. And he realized, after some amazement that is represented by this kite, he realized, well, somehow they must, the precision that I see from at the head of the kite must mean that the red is there. I'm just not understanding how. And begin a series of experiments trying to figure out where the red comes from. How the hell the bees could know how the body of the bee, how the insect of the bee, how the perceptual apparatus of the bee could figure out where the sun is. And at the end, he realized, bees have an extra sense that we don't have. They can perceive polarization angle of light. How is that? It's let's see if I have a figure. For this. Maybe I don't. Here, the eye of the bee is built in a completely different way from the eye of mammals.
Mm-hmm.
Mammal eye or an octopus eye is actually one eye. It has a lens, it works like a telescope. A mammal eye is here, it has a lens with a fixed position that can be deformed, so the focal distance of the lens can be adjusted. An octopus, it's the other way around, that's the human eye. The octopus eye has a lens that has a fixed geometry and can be pushed back and forth like a telescope, so that you have an image at the retina. The retina is also built differently in an octopus in a human. But an eye, but a bee don't has one eye. A bee has a compound eye that's built from hundreds of tiny eyes. Each eye can see only a very small section of the sky, section of the image. The angle, the field angle is very small, but somehow the brain of the bee integrates all those simple eyes into an image of the compound eye. And each of the single eye has a lens that is also polarized, has a filter that's also polarized, so the bees can see in this way. Bees can figure out and work with polarized light, something that we can do. How much time do I have? Almost out of time. But, well, that's the basic idea. Huh? I explore all the kites that I can build in this oppositional structure. Another kite that we can build is the magenta kite that point to archetypal representations that, like Kant, Jung pointed out, has to do with synthetic a priori. Archetypal statements, if they work, and instincts usually work, species evolve instincts by natural selection, so they are well adapted to the world. Instincts that don't work are selected out of the species, or the species go extinct. So in this way, magenta statements are synthetic a priori. Huh? And synthetic a priori is where the hexagon was born. As I hinted in a question that I made to Jaives, Leonard Nelson in 1921 has a book, Typische Denkfehler der Philosophie, where he analyzes how the concept of synthetic a priori leads to several fallacies. A fallacy is what he called a Denkfehler, a mistake of reasoning in philosophy. And those fallacies are born for taking contrarieties or subcontrarieties as contradictions, and for expressing this analysis. He was the first guy to actually work with the hexagonal opposition. So it's another aspect that I can explore. Well, of course, there is a third kite that we can build and use. That's the yellow kite. That kind of has to do with funny things of how build correspond to what we say, or what we say correspond to what we build. But I think I don't have time to do that. But for example, we know that ants and bees coordinate their action so they can accomplish very sophisticated forms of integrated behavior and predictive behavior, and those in collective algorithms. Those algorithms are called swarm algorithms, right? I don't know if you saw this kind of thing. And swarm algorithms are based on some form of communication, some form of coordination of the action of many very simple agents. And this coordination is accomplished by some kind of language. So the form of the language and the form of the algorithm, the parameters of the language and the parameters of the algorithm have to fit together very well. What is kind of strange, if you don't realize they fit together, the mechanism that allows them to fit together very well. And the mechanism that allows them to fit together very well is evolutionary theory. That's why Darwin is in the picture. But that's a very confusing presentation, I know, but it's a paper that I didn't write there already. I'm beginning, having some ideas to write a paper. The paper that I had was the mathematics one, but I decided to go a different way. With 3 minutes to spare,